Good evening, everyone. We had a few coordination hiccups, but we are here with our Kame House, Team 2MK's Dragon Ball Fighters lobby. Today we may be looking mostly at combo routes, but you should expect most discussion, direct discussion anyway, to be happening in the Twitch chat today. As always, you can join us in said lounge. This is a US East Coast lobby, but we're not super concerned about lag given that it is mostly a beginner to intermediate lobby. And therefore, if you're anywhere in the general vicinity or even all the way far down as the Caribbean, you may be able to join in and still get a good enough connection to do some things and learn some things. You're looking for Rillian, the red hit standing outside Kame House in the US East Coast 2 ring match priority 02 lobby. Passcode is 2717, and once again, loser stays on, so you can try out new teams, new tactics, or just anything you feel like you haven't done perfectly and want to learn more about. As for me today and spotting, I'll mostly be reading the Twitch chat, noting anything that anyone says or intends, and maybe commenting a little bit on either if it's working, how well it's working, issues that come up with the execution, or issues that I happen to know how to help fix. As always, if things fall short, we'll be reminding of the mnemonic we used for our previous lessons, so to speak, in this game, and how relevant that is to whatever isn't working out too well for whichever player. Therefore, today is going to be a little lighter on both the psychology of things and specifics in matchup knowledge, at least given from my side. But definitely watch and check the chat for the ideas of the actual players, now that they have everything in mind and all the pieces that they're trying to put together. In this case, Rune Siren mentions a plan avoiding Tien Shinhan entirely with Vegeta Blue. This plan won't work if Vegeta Blue is the only character remaining on the team, as he isn't so good at hitting Tien Shinhan without the support of his assists. However, the two assists available are decent at stopping Tien from doing certain things, so if she can get Tien out Or just beat up Bardock with Kid Buu until Narukon decides to change on purpose. It may be possible to stress him out a little bit with Vegeta by staying in the air and correctly using assists to cover the positions. This seems as if it will take quite a bit of meter, but the payoff might be enough given how Tenshinhan moves in general. He's relatively easy to control once you have him zoned out. And your assist can cover a lot of what happens when he tries to get in. Taking Tenshinhan out becomes advantageous again, given that she'll then be facing characters who her own other two are better at dealing with. And if Vegeta gets to heal up in that time frame, all the better. However, she has to be careful not to lose her plan, as trying to get in on Tenshinhan with Vegeta rather than evading him is likely to go badly. We are seeing some success at the Kid Buu style footsies though. The other characters on this team have a lot more trouble pinning down an aerial character. Whereas while Tenshinhan can't necessarily pin down Buu well, he can punish strongly. Which is where all that meter is going to come into play later. However, even this might not be enough to take a lot, given that it's not going to kill Gohan at all, and it might have been better off being used to hurt Vegeta. But again, this is going to be a question of awareness and use of assists. Since we can count on Narukon's defense to be good enough to force the use of the assists, or to take a long risk getting built up. Ooh, that was almost a finish. This is always the worst situation to be in this game because one Vanish will normally kill you, and it's almost impossible to just defend against raw Vanish indefinitely, while still defending against everything else. So the plan seems to have worked. And I guess we'll see what is used to counter it. Tenshinhan has similar problems with Broly, but for the opposite reason. There we see some of the aforementioned usage of meter and vanish just to track your opponent when you have managed to fly yourself into the air or otherwise lost control or understanding of your positioning. It's usually a good usage even if you get blocked. Ooh, almost got it. That is a very good use of Cell 416, covering space that he doesn't want to commit to. Give him enough time to get something out of it. Oh, as usual, should have woken up with sparking. However, with 6 meters and full health, it may be better off letting Cell handle the sparking himself. Still, that's going to require a lot of precision. But the jump back up block helps. And the sparking begins. Let's see what comes out of it, if anything. Cell's general aim at this point is to bring each enemy down to the point where a good confirm into his level 3 will finish them, and just basically do that over and over. One. Here's the big problem. Even with the meter advantage, bringing Tenshinhan down to this point can be difficult. Still, he does have good range tools, and with one character less to help with his approach, especially given that that character was part of the offensive space team, and the fact that Tenshinhan doesn't handle air movement well in terms of the opponent, Cell has a strong enough advantage here to use this to maybe make it out. And there's 2. The big question final then is, can Gohan either build the level 3 or use a single combo to finish Cell before Cell can convert into that level 3? This is basically a question of damage now. Ooh, a nice trick, but unfortunately a bit too far out and therefore can't close it. So we get to see the apparent attempt at application of any counter to the strategy. Unlike our usual setup, I'm not actually going to be suggesting anything directly.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess.
So, knowing the usual Brawly and 16 strategy, we'll see what happens. It's a lot more dangerous against these characters in the air, but not from further away where Vegeta is able to stay. Boo has a lot more trouble though, so the plan appears to be to handle Broly with either long range or multi-hitting moves to deal with his armor. However, this makes it difficult for Vegeta because he can't afford to be too offensive against Broly. He gets countered really easily, meaning that he's going to have to rely on Boo a lot, and that assist with his multi-hit and good space control. However, overall the zoning effect may work out, given that Broly is tall, and when he does get caught in Super Dash mix-ups because he's either not expecting it or distracted by something else, he can do it fairly easily. This part of the match seems unplanned for the time being, so we're just going to watch it. Generally against Broly and 16, Vegeta really is better off going for mix-ups or pressure after his Super Dash, meaning that it's a little bit easier when he actually has assists he can call at that moment to make the opponent think more. And that super always hurts a lot. The thing that makes this complicated is that Vegeta's Super Dash from the ground doesn't do this job very well. Meaning that you have to go into the air and somewhat telegraph the fact that you're going potentially for that Super Dash. Your opponent can therefore play really defensively and try to catch you in various things. Vegeta Blue does not really have a way to distract you in this way. And if he's not at the right range, his assists don't help either. So there's little nuances here that make it easier to hold him off than you'd initially expect. Since this match tends to be so much long range, you're not going to see a lot of capacity to make use of all the footsies these characters are capable of. But too low on health means raw advantage will end you. So last time, this turned out a little more so emergent than directly planned, or at least the players didn't get around to letting us know what the plan was. But we'll be able to see if it was a completely intentional plan, most likely by if it repeats. So far we're not seeing the last strategy, and in fact rather the opposite. Cell has been fighting without much meter, and has been finished off, leaving 16 to carry it alone. This one doesn't strike me as intentional, but there's still some potential for one or two tricks in the combat department given this character. 16 is actually one of the characters who is best at beating opponents who think it's over, because he has so many strong, hard read style reactions.
俺はバーダック。人違いだ。俺の血を引いてるならもっと強くなれ。その程度では足りんぞ。
Time to begin the match. Get ready.
Here we see Sal taking most of the punishment for some reason, but he isn't necessarily breaking the bank for them. Good timing of the sparking given the general flow of this match so far. But a relatively hefty meter disadvantage might become a problem. As noted, Broly doesn't really handle crouch heavies well. He does have quite a lot of good attacks and ways around things when he super dashes in, but if he really expects to crouch heavy a lot, he has ways around that too. Still, if you're really ready on said crouch heavy and far enough away, Broly has to make his way in, which depending on your assist can actually be really hard for him. We're seeing some good defensive play from Cell with a lot of meter usage, but it's not really losing out so far, so it's gonna reach. Yes, it is. And with no sparking, it still works. However, we see the up back jump particularly strong against adult Gohan, as he has, as mentioned many times, poor tracking. Unfortunately, with no assists to help Broly finish out that combo, Trunks is a lot more capable of just super dashing for free, knowing that the damage will be done, but it won't be terrifying. You can put your opponent under quite a lot of stress with Trunks if they don't have a good way to knock him out of the air and get something off it. Because again, most auto combos don't manage to continue from the air position that well. You have to learn some really complex jump cancels for certain characters, and Broly is among those characters. It's much easier for 16 and Cell to handle that, as they can go straight into moves.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess. Ready? Fight it out!
点数をつけるとすれば30点ってところだ。ビッグバン
The part of this matchup that probably would help the most, therefore, is just straight up raw jump into special without actually going for the big bang. This makes Broly block, but doesn't necessarily have to do anything else. The lesser commitment allows Vegeta to do more things and get a feel for the opponent's position, which would then make them less expectant of things relative to the super dash. Broly beats up Boo a bit more easily, but as you can see, there is a recovery direction that allows you to get away from any missed super dashes on Broly fairly easily. That spacing right there, you can see being quite good, because this is also the spacing from which you can just let go of the stick and call Kid Boo. And in that spacing, Kid Boo's assist will actually reach. Got some recovery here. Giving Cell a bit of a hard time. But there we see the moment of decision. The corner was available, and Kid Buu can handle Cell there. He can also handle 16 there. Forcing is sparking with good timing there. And the whip punish from Vegeta as usual. Again, showcasing that it's really hard to actually do too much problems to Vegeta without really good execution. But Vanish punish, so this becomes a little bit more uphill. And now a lot more uphill. But Kid Buu does have one secret weapon when Broly is dead low on health. Presumably why the immediate switch to Cell, so it was to make sure to reserve that. And having gotten Kid Buu to give up that weapon, now Broly can probably do the rest. Doesn't even matter if Cell falls now. The advantage to Broly in this position in the matchup is much, much higher. Kid Buu no longer has enough meter to really pose a heavy threat and has to go for that sort of thing. Fortunately, it pays off today. And once again, the up-bat jump. We see more conservation of Cell's power at this point. And some good zoning style play from 16, allowing Brawly to recover. And since 16 is not the strongest in this matchup, given that the opponents don't tend to go into the air for him to react to, and can react to him going to the air, losing him first is probably the best option you have if you're definitely expecting to lose a character. And Brawly is of course literally a close second in this case. But Cell comes in at the switch point to keep Brawly alive even better. And does a good job zoning out. Cell versus Teen Gohan tends to be a little difficult because Teen Gohan relies so much on being able to punish really strongly. But Cell doesn't tend to leave himself too open most of the time. He doesn't get a lot of damage unless he does leave himself open, but if you just want to buy time, then that's absolutely something Cell can do. I went for the raw attack rather than Dragon Rush. Dragon Rush would probably have been tagged, but that's sort of an advantageous situation for Brawly. So of the plans we know now, the plan is mostly to continue trying the 2H from OmniRapid's side and to punish Brawly's armored moves. We'll see whether or not this gets countered or if it just doesn't work. so far seems to be working. You already see here actually the backdash to get out of Brawly stuff after going on the offensive. That led to some good things. That's half Brawly's health gone. Even if he recovers, it's still a decent chunk taken. Trunks is a character who is good at handling things through that back forward mobility. He's able to attack from far away, therefore backdashing doesn't take him out of much. A character type that OmniRabbit is really familiar with. So we shouldn't expect him to have too much trouble maximizing that style. However, Krillin vs. Cell tends to be a lot of after image stuff. Cell doesn't react well to after image stuff, because most of Cell's moves are so heavily committed in one particular direction or another. "16, on the other hand, you don't really want to after image against too much. Even if he messes up and tries to counter a fake out, he usually has a way to deal with you afterwards that Krillin has to be really ready for. So it's less of a fake out and more of a bait at that point. And when you're just debating your opponent, they'll recognize that fairly fast. Gohan, on the other hand, is not going to be so great at handling Brawly after those situations. Still, going for pressure instead is a good way to solve that. A good continuation. But one of the main problems that 16 has is his heavy difficulty stopping Krillin from using rocks and therefore the sensor beam. Meaning this is a real battle of attrition. It takes a long time to wear Krillin down. And then you may lose that entirely. See, in the end, you might lose out or be forced into doing something you don't want to do, making 16's life a little hard due to his relatively linear approach. It's a little bit easier when you have a full screen assist to try to stop Krillin or just pin him down while 16 gets in, but without that, Krillin's basically free to recover himself. And he usually has enough time to throw out the rocks to get all the way back around to the sensor beam. So it's really hard to take him down with 16 unless your execution is quite good. Or you've got him cornered, of course. As your opponents get better at doing damage, This particular ability of Krillin's, even against 16 and other characters like him, tends to diminish, but your own skill should probably pick up from there. Meaning it's generally easier to do.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
So it sounds like Runesire will be committing even more, at least in the Brawly case, to Vegeta aerial mix-ups. So far we haven't seen any reason why this won't work. So we're about to either learn it or see more of them succeed.
まずお前から
Get ready! Go! 次は助けんからな。そこだ。やるんだ。やらせんな。
調子に乗るなクズめ邪魔をするな
This works well because Vegeta is so relatively hard to pin down for Brawly. And if you allow him to get too close, he can just call Boo to solve the problem instead of actually doing anything himself. Once again, bear in mind that you're going to have to learn to call assists using down forward on the controller. Otherwise you're going to end up switching and it's going to be a problem. This is one of the first things you should try to learn in this game. How to make sure you're calling your assists rather than switching characters, and obviously how to make sure you're switching instead of calling assists. As you've noted, Kid Buu is actually good at getting dragon rushes in corners, which means that once he gets you to the corner, he more or less controls who he's fighting. And he gets a lot of good mix-ups on incoming characters, meaning that you can spend a lot of time dragon rushing and tossing whoever you're fighting out, in ways that other characters are a little less capable of doing. It's part of this control ability that makes him so strong as a character in a lot of situations. It's not really that other characters can't do this, but rather that Kid Buu tends to do it so consistently in the corner and takes much less meter to set it up otherwise. For example, getting Brawly back out here would be positive enough, but given that the original plan was to give Vegeta a chance at this, we'll see what happens. Unfortunately, another attack from the ground. It's specifically very difficult to use Vegeta Blue if you don't want to basically jump constantly, as so many of his moves change in properties and effectiveness if you try them from the ground. Meaning you have to play fairly measured in that if you get too frantic, you'll end up doing his moves from the ground even when you didn't mean to, and stressing yourself out. So now we have the problem of a Brawly with a lot of health and both assists. As mentioned before, the best option there would have been to somehow corner him and keep on making sure that he's not the one in, until he was down to having no assists and therefore easier to handle. But didn't work out that way today.
Android 16 win.
セル、俺に力を貸してどうするつもりだ。
We've now finally rotated around back to where we started.
This should be a great fight. Get ready. Go.
出てきやがれ油断してたぜ。かかってこい。行くぞ。まあまあだな。かかってこい。なめんじゃねえ。そんなもんかよ。かかってこい。本気で行くぞ。
That was definitely going to come down to whoever made the first decision to either try to switch out or activate sparking. In short, the one with the better judgment or quicker reactions in that situation tends to win, and end up with a huge advantage too. The double Dragon Rush side switch. Super unnerving for the opponent, and being unnerving like that can be a very strong strategy, as shown. Evening this one up in the end, regardless of the previous heavy advantage. So it's sparking that's chosen this time. Ah, because the sparking will then go to Boo, making Bardot's life basically super miserable. And forcing Bardot to do the sparking himself. Tactically a fairly tight match here, but will this actually cause timing? No, the sparking is still active long enough to not win out that way. But now we have a fairly heavy advantage to Vegeta, even against Bardock in this situation, given that Vegeta can now activate level 3 if need be, making Bardock's life a lot scarier. But can he get the finish? If he can, then that might be enough. Still, getting through Boo with both these characters is going to be a real pain. However, big damage. Unfortunately, it's still not necessarily going to be enough. Boo is really able to close out things like this from far away, and there's no longer enough of a meter advantage for Tenshinhan to be sure of it. There we go though. Oh, recovery. Probably went a little too linear at the end, but that was sort of a guess, so there's no way to know.
お前と手合わせできたこと武道家として誇りに思う 初めから全力でかかってくるんだな
Against this team, you're much more likely to see Kid Buu be able to use his other attacks, Bubblegum Ball and his Stand Heavy, because of the positions this team has to try to occupy. Attacking from the air makes it easier for them. Using long normals on the ground, however, can stress them out. But when your opponent knows this, they of course will take their own approaches. Still, don't give up on your long good normals if you don't have to. Make your opponent show you that they know something they plan to do about it. There's no point in playing without your character's strengths just because you think they might be countered. That's partially what people are usually talking about when they say that they'll make you prove it. It's not always risky or particularly unsafe things they're talking about, but rather just strengths of their character that they want to use. That was a good play given that Buu is just better off in the air, so him vanishing upward to catch someone really isn't disadvantageous to him very much. However, Trunks does handle him well in those situations. For example, a good reason why Buu might want to chuck Trunks out in the corner, if he has the option, for a character who can pressure more easily. Well, if you're going to lose someone to level 3 in this matchup, probably should have been Gohan. This sort of thing tends to force the sparking either way, but there's no real loss to it. That was where you were going either way. What we were missing there was for Boo to help cover the corner escape. But there's still a chance that will work out positively the other way. And it does. Given the large meter advantage, there was always a chance of it getting turned around. Perfect time to use it now that the level 3 will not exactly work out for Krillin. He can kill either character with it, but if he has to, he won't be left with anything to face the last one with. And his health is too low to be sure of much. Technically a good move, knowing that one will build back up the meter for the level 3 if you absolutely need it just in time. But now Krillin has his, so... And given our players, that was a relatively predictable outcome. One of the big keys in this is going to be learning when you're at the spacing to call Kid Buu, and for the other side, when they're at the spacing to call Cell. Those are approximately the same spacing, making it even more complicated.
丈夫ですか？
すれば無駄なことを殺してやる。調子に乗るな。分数をつけるとすれば30点と無駄なことを邪魔者は排除した。セル、俺に力を貸してどうするつもりだ。
Now we're going to see another one of our more pushy matches. Most of the discussion right now has more to do with combo routes, as we were mentioning before. Lots of testing to do, lots of properties to understand. It's definitely something most people will know for most of their own characters, depending on what they use those characters for. But people also have a tendency to assume that things they do with their characters are available to everyone, which may not always be true. So always remember to double check these things when you are playing your character. And don't just assume that because other characters can do it or you hear people talking about it, that it's always that way. This game is a little bit nuanced when it comes to certain characters and what their abilities are. So let's observe for a bit based on the other theory. Specifically that you can only smash someone upward with your aerial down heavy, assuming that your characters even could do that. If the move you did before it was capable of jump cancelling, whether or not it actually did. A quick and dirty game theory. There are also, of course, situations in which you can't jump cancel, which might be removing the capacity to do the aerial to H. But hopefully our players won't get too caught up in this, as it's normally something that you're better off dealing with in training mode. Still, you can still observe why particular things happen in particular ways, making it easier to feel comfortable and not frustrated. Normally this sort of thing forces the sparking outright, but not today. We'll find out from the players after, or at least from whoever wins, whether or not that seems to have been at least partially the situation. Of course, it's not going to be easy to tell because some of it could always just be execution. Advantage is still mostly on Omni Rabbit's side at the moment. But that sparking moment is going to become important. Or not. There's the other option. It's technically the better option. Invincible move versus sparking that your opponent expects. The invincible move is the one that's going to kill them. And the slide into standing 2H. Despite our late start to stream, we're probably not going longer than we usually do, which means we've gotten about an hour more. So, given our winner, maybe we'll get some information on potential reasons, or if their perception was just, that was mostly execution, or the fact that through the execution they can't actually tell. Sadly, as mentioned before, Brawly does have some trouble opening you up without certain assists. He is a character who will stick to you, but because he sticks to you so well, you have to be fairly creative to get your opponent to actually stop blocking. Similar to Johnny feeling in Guilty Gear, your better option against Bardock pressure, again, if he doesn't have certain assists available, is usually just block the whole thing. Choosing not to wake up Sparking, not necessarily regretting it, but it didn't exactly hurt in the other way either. Tall characters like 16 can actually respond to Vanish in particular ways if they're really expecting it. I mean, it's another situation where watching your opponent and understanding their pressure string, especially distance-wise, is more of a defensive tactic than trying to get out of it in some specific way. This is going to be harder without Cell, given that it leaves you with no characters who can easily take you from half to dead. So having done all of that damage to get most of Nodocon's characters to half may not be enough. Strategically, the disadvantage is pretty bad at this point, but Brawly is good at tanking his way through a ton of things and literally face rolling people. So and without the opponent's Sparking available, there's still a chance that Brawly specifically can do some stuff here, as he has relative control of the screen once he reaches this position. At full screen, neither Tien nor Bardock stands up to Brawly easily, and they're mostly just looking to get his health low enough to get the raw Vanish, or make a mistake like that one. But even then, still have to deal with 16's similar ability. Ooh, but he doesn't go for the swap out. Getting damage on Tien might actually be worth it though. It is a big risk given how much Tien's damage works. And that big risk has turned into defeat. Cell's high aerial capacity versus Brawly means that there's going to be a lot of difficulty pinning him down. With the available assists, it'll be even harder for this, meaning that Brawly versus Cell in this particular setup is not likely to lead to too much good things. So we of course see 16 switch in, who has a much better time of handling that, but as we mentioned before, eventually you'll get to the point where both players no longer feel as if they have a big disadvantage, and those characters will normally be the ones to play out the first part of the match. "16, however, is terrible against Cybermen. Meaning that every time Nappa does manage to get a chance to put one out, it's gonna really stress out the opponent. Brawly, on the other hand, is super good against Cybermen, so you see the swap out immediately. That was a back block moment. And unfortunately, without it, it looks like Cell is going down. Once again, switching out entirely to prevent having to deal with the fact that Brawly counters so much of what makes Nappa good. However, Vegeta's movement and invincible moves make it a lot easier to catch Brawly in Dragon Rushes, meaning that you have the choice of either trying to get your damage that way or not fighting him at all, really. The optimal situation in that position, therefore, would have actually been to try to finish off with Vegeta. Because once Brawly is gone, Nappa's advantage is usually big enough to deal with things. And you don't have to deal with this. But 5 bars of meter and still sparking available means that if enough Dragon Rush control is applied, some things might still happen. Still, without assists, it's much harder for Vegeta to set up those Dragon Rushes. So the final verdict here is, the tactic might have worked, but it turned out to be just one missed up block. There's therefore a definite chance that we'll see something like that happening the next time they face each other. Trunks vs. Cell is mostly a matter of Cell's ability to target his blasts, to know whether or not Trunks is going to be on the ground or otherwise. Once he gets in, his assists start to help. But Trunks always has that option. Just get off the ground and go for the super dash, which Cell has little or no response to, given that he would usually be in a move. It's effectively a whiff punish. All characters can do this to him, but Cell tends to suffer the most against characters who have good, strong follow-up moves, as he can't create the space he wants. Meaning that this whole match is relatively difficult with the intended tactics. There's a lot of pin down possible though, so let's see what we get out of that. Without Gohan's lack of good air moves means that he has to put himself back in the position where Nappa has some advantage at least, fairly often. But because he can't immediately take action, given that Nappa can counter, he tends to put himself in the defensive and therefore end up easier to grab with Dragon Rush. In fact, this team has always been described on the stream as more the grappler side of the game. But it's not because they're actually using mix-ups to get the Dragon Rushes, but rather that they're changing the situation so you're more likely to block and not likely to respond to movement by immediately attempting to do something tech-like. In other words, they're not confusing, and if you really want to challenge them, you'll nearly never get Dragon Rushed, but they're intended to not make you want to challenge. When Nappa's on the team instead of Gotenks, Nappa is able to change the spacing at the end of Vegeta and Cell's pressure strings so that they stay at constant advantage. Gutsy not going for the sparking at all. Possibly a little too gutsy. But effective in this case, causing a much heavier use of meter without much effect. Sparking forced on this side cleanly, but going in a little too hard afterwards. Still, Cell and Nappa alone can handle this. Because Trunks is out of the way. Now you'd think this would be hard, but on defense, without too much else to worry about, Nappa's supers are actually relatively strong. He's not good at building meter, but once he's got it, he can hold his own for a bit. This is mostly because his supers are either going to hit or be hard to punish most of the time. Therefore, with enough meter like this, he's a dangerous character because he's hard to get anything started on. But there it is. And a miss. But unfortunately, too much faith in the Raw Vanish. current plan is hard knockdowns on Tenshinhan, and not much else. So let's see what happens. And we see once again that incredible Team Gohan punish range. Going from full screen super to death. The plan from before didn't work as well against this team.
It's all or nothing. Let's go.
Seems that part of the reason is that if Broly isn't really trying to get in on you, but is rather playing defensively himself, a lot of Cell's options don't work that well on him. It's an interesting way of doing it, but sometimes you have to go outside the box of how a character is supposed to be played as a generality in a matchup just to see what your opponent can handle. No reason to switch Brawly out here, as his advantage over Nappa is relatively large. Especially with his power shell up. So you can see, basically, by refusing to actually try to go in, Brawly is able to stand up to Cell for relatively long periods. Once again, choosing not to wake up with the sparking, and down he goes. Another large advantage that Nappa has here is the fact that functionally 16 can't really quickly attack him from full screen. And he doesn't have very good direct downward attacks other than Super Dash itself. Meaning that Nappa gets a lot of time to put Cybermen down. But he does have to react immediately after doing so. Meaning there's always a chance he'll be baited by the twitch reaction that he employs after the opponent gets into position. And there we have that assist doing its job, changing the spacing. Cell absolutely can, however, punish Nappa for attempting to put down Cybermen at all, making this a much harder thing to do, but with Nappa having a lot more meter, more trickery can happen. Similarly, psychologically, the opponent will tend to want to stay further away, meaning that you can have Nappa just sit there purely for the purpose of someone else regenerating. Saw it coming that time, but still not really much damage. So even if you do still see it and manage to punish Vegeta for it, it still doesn't necessarily turn out in your favor too much. And the big confirm for the finish, a decent idea given that keeping the characters is more important than keeping the meter. And if absolutely required, one could really just win this one by timeout. Stressing the opponent more by removing their assist options, therefore, is probably the best way to do this. So we saw a lot more Vegeta versus Brawly that time. Seemed to work out better. In this case, there's no reason to assume that the plan has changed from Omnirapid's side. And we've mostly been seeing emergent plans from the other side. So, Trunks cares a lot less about the powered shell than most characters, and gets those sorts of situations, even if he doesn't actually get to punish because you have either spaced yourself well, or because you were safe. Trunks still gets a lot more out of attempting to punish, and functionally speaking, for Trunks every punish is a mix-up. A good recovery, keeping out of Krillin's spacing and pressures. But again, Krillin isn't really the best character to be doing this with, because most of his after-image stuff gets beaten by some of 16's better options. Still, managing to do enough damage to 16 to cause to switch out means you get to keep fighting with more Krillin. Good respacing. Patiently staying on the ground, knowing that Trunks is not one of those characters that benefits a whole lot from vanishing into the air to chase. As a general rule, only the adult Gohan manages that well on this team. But we're back to that other problem, where eventually Krillin will just heal himself if 16 has to fight him for too long. Or 16 will be left open by some sort of setup like that, making the whole thing just a mess. So we're definitely seeing a payoff of this plan. Good counter. Ooh, but goes for this a little early. On the other hand, oh no, it didn't even hit, so no way to force the sparking this time. I mean, it's going to be a hard road from here. But missed from the other side too. After image, perfect use there. Unfortunately, he didn't build up enough meter during the forward movement to go for the second part of it and actually close it out, allowing Cell to force the sparking after all. Probably. But no. Once again, keeping in mind that Krillin is so strong against grapplers when he takes big damage, because of their tendency to try to think specifically and relatively slowly about how to get in on him, but more importantly, that if they're at full screen spacing, reaching him in time to punish the Senzu beam can be difficult. The obvious easy answer is just to vanish instead and swipe the beam yourself, but you haven't really solved the situation at that point. So I was trying not to have to use that sparking, making it out. And the tactic's paying off in the end. Ooh, right in the face.
立て直すそこだな
誤算だったな。もっと強くならなければまだ見ぬ敵を倒すために。
And so we return to another Cell versus Broly setup. Last time we saw a lot of Vegeta usage. Vegeta stands up to most of this team decently. Can have some trouble against Cell based on his spacing. But if he can manage to get advantage against Cell before Cell can get going, it might help later on. So, we're expecting to see Vegeta, but maybe there's another plan. Vegeta is also relatively strong at getting Dragon Rushes against these characters, leading to some really good situations for him in terms of meter advantage later on. And there's that moment where Broly has to care about Cyberman. But a good timing. Once again, we see that Vegeta hasn't really taken a lot of damage from Broly being in. This is going to be a lot of switching. Jockeying for position. But slowly, it looks as if Vegeta is going to end up getting the advantage. Because it's too hard to really push on this with 16. Meaning that Cell has to come in every time. And get worn down at least a bit. Another good approach would be to just Dragon Rush and throw Cell out whenever you could. Which is another fairly hefty solution to the situation, given that the characters that don't handle Cell all that well, in the strict sense, also manage to throw him out fairly easily. From the other side, being aware of this and not using your assist too much so that whenever one of your characters does get thrown, you get to bring them back in immediately. A pretty good deal overall. Oh, but going for the attack instead of the Cyberman. Presumably because of the huge meter advantage here. With the meter advantage, Nappa is able to perform things that the opponent is less expecting. And soak up more damage. Ooh. But Broly does get out. Once cornered, Broly is not that strong against Cell. He doesn't track him as easily as most characters. In mid-screen, it's easier to handle this. Once again though, Nappa, full meter. There's still a chance that this will turn really poorly, purely because you'll get unexpected things out of Nappa. Things like that. With even the result of taking Nappa back out immediately. Nappa's one of those characters who's really good at cancelling his super into other characters because it takes him out, but covers a lot of space and confirms easily for other people. A free way to get him in without any actual attack even being possible, meaning you get to set up the Cybermen immediately. Good try. So now we've got air zoning, but the Cybermen are still around, and that means there's going to be a mess. What a finish. So what's the best option here from the other side? Brawly doesn't handle Trunks well, as is being demonstrated very quickly here. And while Trunks doesn't get to keep his pressure going without worrying about Brawly's responses, he does get to stay safe for really long periods, meaning that the fight can get dragged out fairly long. "16 would be therefore your best option overall, but he's still not a strong advantage, particularly because using assists is difficult and Krillin can tank him more or less forever. Even if Krillin does start to take damage, he'll eventually just recover it. Therefore, 16's best bet is to try to corner Krillin as quickly as possible so he doesn't have as much space to cover in the screen when Krillin wants to heal up. But there's that full screen space. And of course, since you can use this option to heal Krillin instead, the whole defensive Krillin style stands up pretty well against 16 as a character. Just don't get cornered. Or caught in that really long, nearly invincible combo with no meter. Cell's pretty good at getting away from Adult Gohan's punishes, but not all of them, just the ones that aren't very committed. Adult Gohan has a stand heavy strong enough to punish or nearly punish Cell's back dash, which is probably one of the most important aspects of this matchup. This method therefore being some really effective attrition. And he escapes completely using his assist to help him. In corners. Definitely good movement today, making Broly's life fairly miserable. When Broly is alone and has no assist of his own, he's about as effective as 16 at stopping Krillin from doing certain things. But at least he has some zoning that will really actually stop this, as opposed to the other kind. But there's the healing. And the punish for trying to deal with the healing. But the vanish chase, good stuff. Still, this match is going rather long and might end on timeout. Since it really doesn't matter how well Broly can keep these two out anymore. He's at too big a disadvantage in terms of that. So the plan appears to be more stand heavy from Nappa against 16. But this is only after Cybermen have been placed, so we may see some assists involved in setting this up. But the initial is most likely going to be Cell putting on a little pressure, throwing out some moves to give Vegeta the chance to get in. And then Vegeta attempting to handle Broly. Cell gets to take a little damage, knowing that he will mostly bring it back later, and to get the opponent into the rhythm of not thinking about punishing the switch. Nappa a little bit slow there. But even then, still not really enough to make that a real blow up for Vegeta. Unfortunately, the corner did not work there. Because Nappa again can function against Broly in the corner, but you didn't get to keep it, which means it's now a problem. But he's back out. Vegeta doesn't press as much, knowing that Nappa can't just be called back to solve the problem anymore. But we're going to start seeing those dragon rushes. And the assist mix-ups. Good timing of the sparking this time. It was absolutely better to hold on to Cell for as long as possible there. We have the back jump up block into downward super dash. A good escape method against Vegeta as a generality. But Vegeta's probably done his job by now. And gets to take a break. Cell versus 16 is again advantage to 16, at least at this level. So, Nappa's gonna probably come back in, and there he is now. There's some meter, even though not meter advantage. And the Cybermen are in position. A lot of this is therefore based on 16 staying in the air and moving around to keep away from the Cybermen as a generality. But this is a really dangerous thing to do against Nappa with meter. He converts super easily in those situations. And then gets to heal up any damage he took. The problem is, of course, the tracking. You have to be fairly comfortable with Nappa's supers in order to make that work. So, we don't get to see that today. However, most opponents have been fairly heavily taken down. Unfortunately, Cell is gone now. Vegeta still can do this. He can convert into Final Flash pretty easily to get finishes if he needs to. So this is now probably going to be more so with punishes and big finishes. And trying not to get caught with Cell himself. One. And this is the big moment. Whoever manages to convert into level 3 first in that matchup would win. But Vegeta has to decide if to, therefore, hold that meter against a character who doesn't have good supers. So as to not have to worry about it. But a spectacular conversion off the wall bounce takes it. As you can see, Cell's strength against Trunks is somewhat limited by the amount of time Trunks can be off the ground and still be effective, in the strict sense of effective. However, once you've pinned him down, it's more likely that Trunks will be focused on that and therefore can be caught in the Dragon Rush. It's pinning him down that's the hard part. But with Nappa continuing to help, and Vegeta coming in, we're likely to see more of this. Part of the reason why this is so important is that Vegeta converts better off of Dragon Rush than a lot of characters normally manage. Especially on cornered opponents, he can actually get a lot of damage. Krillin's problem here is that while he's not a grappler, unless he's ready, he's not that strong against Cybermen either. It takes him a lot more meter to be ready for this, and a lot more actions are taken involving Nappa being able to counter with his supers. But once cornered, this gets a little messy. Still, since Nappa tends to have the meter to switch out to someone who can handle the situation better, he doesn't really have to worry so much. Raw switch with Nappa is way harder, and you may want to save some of your meter to catch him opportunities like that. Doesn't go for the Dragon Rush immediately. And Omni Rabbit has time to switch into a character who is much more likely to take actions rather than have to put up with the mentality change that the Dragon Rush causes. Cybermen don't tend to bother Adult Gohan. But that worked out well. A good high jump timing, taking him out of the way at the level 3. This is a little risky though, because Cell is definitely a character who can just confirm into level 3 and kill you from this level of health. And Vegeta is no less capable of it. But the healing! And with that, probably the round. Oh, now it does not go for the super conversion, meaning that Adult Gohan gets to get away. Nappa is absolutely the meter hog of this team. The other two basically let Nappa use all the meter until he falls, and hopefully there's still enough for them to make things. But you don't want to lose anyone in the first place, so it's better to do that in this case, given that keeping Nappa around is really useful for their pressure. I mean, this, for example, is still possible purely based on meter advantage. If you need Vegeta in, really, you could still get it. But I guess the super was a little too predictable this time. The question is, with 35 seconds on the clock, if Vegeta does a lot of damage, but everyone remains alive, what really happens here? But the franticness has obviously led into the use of the super and therefore the punish. The plan suffering a little bit due to a failed confirm into Nappa's super earlier in the round in the corner. But as always, it's more important to be able to see these things than specifically to execute them. Seeing things you can train, generally only in matches. Doing them you can train in training mode. Nappa definitely cannot hold off Teen Gohan that easily. He often suffers in the Punisher game, and really doesn't get to use his Cybermen much, but his counter gets a lot stronger in this matchup. Partially because the counter is a good mix-up with both his Dragon Rush and his switches and assists. And because of the space he tends to take up. Called Nappa a little late into that particular pressure string. Doesn't go for the wake up sparking, trusting Kim1 can get out. Looks like it's possible. Tenshinhan is much worse overall at stopping Cybermen, but if he's really ready for it, he'll still manage. Mostly, you should be aiming to figure out when your opponent wants to retreat out of certain things, and put them down at that point. Works out, but the result is not necessarily in favor. We'll see what happens. Now we have the Cell versus Bardock problem. But looks like it might not be a problem if Cell can get... Nope, he escapes, or at least somewhat escapes. Bardock's buttons and ranges means that you have to commit a lot harder to punishing Cell than most other characters. For example, there you can see he didn't actually have to commit that hard to that. Did not confirm until level 3, but at this point, and again doesn't. That may come back to haunt. As Vegeta has a much harder time confirming to level 3 on Teen Gohan, or rather setting up the confirm in the first place. But the grappler style pays off in the end. Leading us into our final match of the night. We've seen a lot more plans today, and a lot of shifting tactics. But this is the final.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble.
Tomorrow's content for 2MK is not completely decided, but it's definitely narrowed down. You're either going to see some practice with Blancabot, with some specific explanations based on that,
Are you ready?
or some DOA5 last round action. Feel free to join in. That is almost certainly going to be a lounge US East Coast as usual, and of course the game is free, so even if you don't know that much about it, you can just jump in for the sake of poking buttons in fighting games. At the moment, that's our much more likely content, so I wouldn't say you should expect to be disappointed, especially if anyone makes any indication that they prefer we do that. Fairly daring to keep 16 in, but he's finally out. It was presumably related to the amount of damage that would happen on a bad switch. Fear Tension Han. Not necessarily as a core character, but someone who understands how to make him hurt people, you have to care. And Brawly comes right back down. It looked like some dropped execution. But at the end of the day, Team Gohan is definitely still going to give Brawly a lot of stress in the corner like this. Is it enough? It is enough. Generally, you don't have to ask that question with Team Gohan. Certainly not with Tien backing him up. If you play this type of team, your focus is almost always improving your neutral, because worrying about how to get people dead with them is probably not your top priority for getting better at the game. Join us on Monday for Mishmashing Down in Street Fighter V, and on Tuesday for Tuesday Train, Guilty Gear. Next week Wednesday will be more Street Fighter content, and bringing us back around to Thursday for more Kame House. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Enjoy your training. Good night, everyone.
俺の血を引いてるならもっと強くなれ